All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Strong, Healthy Bones for Peri and Post-Menopausal Runners. It's really great to see everyone here. I see we already have, there's already like 70 or 80 people joining. So that's excellent news. Guys, if you wouldn't mind jumping into the chat, letting us know where you're from, that would be amazing. It's always nice to see people around the world. I mean, as it is, I'm sitting in Pretoria, South Africa, and Lora is in Ontario in Canada. So really awesome to have you all here. So yeah, please pop in the chat and let me know where you guys are from. Runners, non-runners, really cool to have you guys all here. I see, there we go. People are clicking in. Jacqueline saying she's from Toronto. Now they're all coming in. Liz is from Rochester, New York. Amy is from India. Awesome. There we go. We got P. Steffler from London, Ontario, Canada, not London, the UK. Shamala, who's one of our athletes, she's in Stockholm. Excellent, guys. This is really cool. Thank you so much. Lots of Toronto. So Laura, thank you for bringing the Canadians along. I have a Ruth Pratt from London in the UK. Welcome, Ruth. Really nice to have you guys here. So excellent, guys. So really excited for this. This is one of the first one of these that we've done, and really grateful to Laura for being here. So thank you, Laura, for that. I had a bit of a starstruck moments. I've been following Laura on the socials for a while, and so I'm really excited. So Laura, firstly, let me just say thank you to you for being here, and I'm going to take it from there. So yeah, welcome. Firstly,
thank you for having me.
Excellent. So everyone, everything that you guys as female runners and runners is a loose term. I always have people tell me, I'm not really a runner, and I'm always like, hey, well, if you put right foot, left foot, right foot in front of each other and you put your running shoes on, you are a runner. And for the most part, hopefully what you're going to get out of tonight is that we really want to show you aspects of things that are going to help you look after your bones moving forward. So just a brief introduction. If you don't know me, my name is Shona Hendricks. I'm a former head of sports science at the University of Pretoria. I have a postgraduate degree in sports science. I have an MBA, and I'm a certified strength and conditioning specialist. I also have created a framework called the Running Through Menopause Training Framework, and that's at coachperi.com. I've also done a number of races and triathlons. I've done a number of the World Marathon Majors. Just got back from London, where I did London Marathon and done 7 half Ironman distance triathlons. And you may be wondering, well, why is this 29-year-old speaking about menopause? Really, my passion lies in women in sports, and it's just developed into researching more and more about menopausal women. And really, I feel that we need to start changing the narrative about females in sports and menopausal women in running and giving them the information that they need. I know the research is coming through a little bit slower, but yeah, my passion lies there. And yeah, so while I am only 29/40, I am my passion really does lie in menopausal women in running. In particular, I'm not an expert in all of the aspects, more so in terms of a running coach, and that's why we have someone like Lora with us tonight. So yeah, just to welcome to Dr. Lora. She's a professor in the Departments of Kinesiology and Health Sciences at the University of Waterloo, and is a Schlegel Research Chair in Mobility and Aging. She leads the Bone Health and Exercise Science Lab. The Bone-S Lab team leads research on physical activity for older adults and people with osteoporosis. She is also a member of the Scientific Advisory Council for Osteoporosis Canada and was on the leadership team that developed the 2020 Canadian 24-hour movement guidelines. So that's really where all of this important stuff that we're going to be talking about tonight. She has also led the exercise working group for the 2023 clinical practice guidelines for management of osteoporosis and fracture prevention in Canada. So we definitely have an expert in our midst. So thank you, Laura, for joining us. I hope Canada's springing as well as it can.
Yeah, it's great weather. We've got nice sunny weather, perfect for running. So
excellent. Yeah, there we go. Brilliant. So I'm going to hand over to Laura, guys. Let me just say this before I start. If you really, this is the first of one of these webinars. We are going to be doing a number of these and focusing in around menopause, perimenopause, running in particular. And if you like what you see, please share it with your friends. Also, just make sure that you hit the subscribe button on YouTube, because we will be doing a couple more of these. So please just get involved. I'm just trying to find Laura's slides here while I I'm just trying to get it back to the beginning. So sorry about that. Just to slide number 1, and then we can get started. But yeah, if you like what you see and you want to see more on this topic in and around how to run well to and through menopause, if you're in perimenopause, post-menopause, yeah, this is definitely for you. So yeah, I'm gonna hand over to you, Laura, and yeah, you can take it away. Sorry, and then last thing before I hand over to you, guys, if you have questions, please pop them into the chat. Okay, we will wait till Laura's presentation is done, and then we're definitely going to hang around and have a longer Q&A afterwards. But what I'll do is, as she's going through her presentation, I'll flag those questions, and we're going to stick around and do a long Q&A. So please keep those questions coming as we go along. All right. Thank you, Laura. Thank you for your time, and yeah, really looking forward to this.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's a different type of talk. I usually do talks, specific to an osteoporosis crowd, like people who are very interested because they have a diagnosis of osteoporosis, or healthcare providers who are interested in managing osteoporosis. And so I tried to think today about, what would people who are runners who want to learn about bone health learn about? So that's kind of where I focused my presentation for today. So I'll start with sort of defining what osteoporosis is. And so it's low bone mass, or having less bone than normal or average. But it's also a deterioration of bone tissue. So we see changes in bone structure. And sometimes you can have small changes in bone structure that you can't really measure on a bone mineral density test, let's say. So some people will have fractures at bone mineral density that's not really, really low. And then some people will have really low bone density. So bone density alone, that test that they do, doesn't always explain all of fracture risk. So some people have changes in bone structure. So you can see, for example, on the slide, there's kind of like a little bit of disconnectedness between the bone. So it's not just that there's less bone there, but that the bone is thinner and it's less well connected. So there's these changes in bone structure and the amount of bone we have, and that causes an increased risk of fracture, meaning that you're more likely to fracture in an event that wouldn't normally cause a fracture. Like, for example, you trip and put out an outstretched hand and you break your wrist, where you wouldn't normally do that if you were just falling from a standing height. Osteoporotic fractures, or fragility fractures as they're sometimes called, are very common. In Canada, they're more common than heart attack, stroke, and breast cancer combined. So 1 in 3 women and 1 in 5 men over the age of 50 will have a fracture due to osteoporosis in their lifetime. And again, most of the stats and things I'm going to use today are Canadian, but very similar stats in other countries as well. So does anyone know what the symptoms of osteoporosis are? You can maybe throw it in the chat if you know. And I'm going to hint, it's a trick question. Anyone have a thought about that?
No one biting yet, Laura. No
one biting yet.
Yeah,
give them one more minute.
Yeah. There we go. Sabina saying none.
Says none. Pam also says none. And right, there are no symptoms. So there's no symptoms. You can have low bone mass and not know it. The first sign that you might have osteoporosis is that you break something. And so some people have said, a wrist fracture is often the first sign that you have osteoporosis and that you need to do something about it. Because wrist fractures are the most common type of fracture and I'm using women here because there's more statistics in women, but most common type of fracture in women less than 75 years of age. The most common osteoporotic fracture, the one that occurs most commonly, is actually that in the spine. So approximately 20% of Canadian women and 20% of Canadian men over the age of 50 had evidence of a spine fracture in a large population-based study. So they're very common, and you can have multiple spine fractures at a time because you have many vertebrae. And they can occur due to falls or due to other events, like, for example, lifting something really heavy. These are underdiagnosed. And then hip fractures are the ones that many people are worried about, because the hip fracture can have a significant impact on your mobility and often be that event that means a person can no longer live independently. And in fact, the mortality rate after hip fracture is very high. So anywhere between 25, 28, 30, even 37%, depending on the study you look at, of people who have a hip fracture will die in the year following the fracture, often due to complications related to the hip fracture. And of those that survive, only 50% will recover their pre-fracture mobility. So very significant cause of disability. And in fact, the risk of death is increased, or premature death is increased also with spine fractures. So who should have a bone mineral density test? So the main risk factors for fracture are listed here, although there are others that are not listed here. But who should have, so we first look at when a person is 50 or older, we look at how many risk factors they have, and that can tell us whether or not they should have a bone mineral density test. So older age is a risk factor. Having a history of fragility fracture after the age of 40 is a risk factor. Prolonged use of glucocorticoid medication, so these are things like prednisone, taken orally, so not inhaled steroids, but orally for 3 months or longer. Falls, parental hip fracture, current smoking, high alcohol intake, so 3 or more units a day, BMI less than 20 kilograms per meter squared, so low BMI, and then causes of secondary osteoporosis. So secondary osteoporosis is when you have bone loss due to some other factor. So people with celiac disease, for example, or people with type 1 diabetes, they often have very low bone mass. So these are some causes of secondary osteoporosis. There's also a number of medications that can cause bone loss as well. And so if we, so type 1 diabetes, people with type 1 diabetes are at increased risk of fracture due to low bone mass, as well as there's other things that with diabetes that it can increase your risk of fracture. Interestingly, people with type 2 diabetes are also at increased risk of fracture, and that's independent of bone density. So sometimes they have normal bone density and yet still are at increased risk of fracture. And yes, DEXA is the same as a BMD test. So who should have a bone density test or a DEXA scan? So if you're 50 to 64 years old and you have 2 or more risk factors, then you should ask your physician for a referral for a bone mineral density test. If you're between 65 and 69 years old and you have 1 or more risk factors, then you should have a bone density test. And anyone over the age of 70 should probably have a bone mineral density test. Now, these are Canadian guidelines. So the guidelines in your country, or who is sort of funded, depending on your healthcare system, for bone density tests may be different. So this is in Canada. This is what our guidelines say. So you'd have to look at what your country's guidelines are, but they're probably reasonably similar. Anyone who has a history of hip or spine fracture or 2 or more fragility fractures should have a bone density test, regardless of other risk factors. What about people younger than 50? So the guidelines are often designed, and fracture risk assessment tools are often designed for people over the age of 50 or even over the age of 40 if you're looking at fracs. And so existing international guidance suggests that a bone mineral density test may be indicated for people under the age of 50 who have risk factors for low bone mass, such as very low body weight, having a prior fracture, high risk medication use, and there's a very long list of those, or a disease or condition that's associated with bone loss. So for example, some of the research I do looks at bone loss in people with spinal cord injury. People who have a spinal cord injury often have it at very young ages and lose a lot of bone mass in their lower extremities. And so they may be a good example of someone who might need a bone mineral density earlier in life. So what is a bone density test? Well, the hip bone density test, the x-ray looks like this. And essentially it's a 2-dimensional x-ray scanner, and they measure how many x-rays get through your body, and they can calculate roughly how much bone mass you have based on the amount of x-rays that get through. Denser bones absorb more x-rays. And so they basically, what they do is they compare the number they calculate to what is average for a young healthy female, and they calculate what's called a T-score. So that's the number of standard deviations different than average that you are. And so osteoporosis is defined by a bone mineral density T-score less than or equal to minus 2.5 standard deviations below normal. And then the term osteopenia is referred to somewhere between -1 and -2.5. So that's kind of how they define it based on bone mineral density. And then many countries are now using FRAX, which is a tool, and you can actually access this online, where a physician will enter the bone mineral density T-score as well as all the other risk factors, and it'll calculate a 10-year probability of having a fracture in the future. So like, what is your likelihood of having a fracture in the next 10 years? Now, this uses hip bone density, so it doesn't actually consider spine bone density. So a physician should also look at your spine bone density, because some people will have a normal hip bone density, but then a very low spine bone density, and that might indicate their increased risk of fracture, even though their FRAX score suggests otherwise. So it's really important to consider not just the bone density, but also all of these other risk factors, because some of these risk factors suggest you're at increased risk, even if your bone density is not really, really low. And so this is so for example, a 50-year-old and an 80-year-old who have the same bone density will have different fracture risk. So the 80-year-old will be at higher risk than the 50-year-old just based on age alone, because age is a risk factor. My slides, oh, there they go, they disappeared. So your physician may use that tool to determine what your fracture risk is. Another thing they can look at, because spine fractures are undiagnosed, they might decide to send someone for a spine x-ray if they have a history of height loss. So when we're losing height, people think losing height with aging is normal. It's not. It's usually due to either disc degeneration, loss of vertebral height, so a spine fracture, or it can also be due to changes in the soft tissue like weak extensor muscles. But if someone is losing height, so if they have height loss of 2 centimeters measured, so they've measured their height and then later measured it again and there's a change of 2 centimeters, or historical, like I remember I used to be this high or this tall and now I'm 6 centimeters shorter. If there is that height loss difference, then probably they might consider having a spine x-ray to see if any fractures have occurred. There's a few other things that a physician can look at, such as occiput to wall distance in standing and rib to pelvis distance. And these are kind of clinical assessments that a doctor will do. But if you do notice height loss, this might be something to mention to your physician. So what are the strategies that we can use for fracture prevention? So if someone has osteoporosis or if they're at high risk of fracture based on FRAX, they might consider medication. Everyone should look at their nutrition to make sure they're getting adequate calories, protein, calcium, and vitamin D. We want to think about fall prevention. The vast majority of fractures occur due to falls. So if we can prevent falls, we can prevent a lot of fractures. And then exercise to maintain muscle, maintain bone, and maintain physical functioning and prevent falls. So if you are at high risk of fractures, your physician may recommend that you start medication. In Canada, bisphosphonates are the first line treatment. There are other medications available if that's not a good option for you. For high-risk individuals, the benefits of taking bisphosphonates for 3 to 6 years outweigh their potential harms. There's a nice handout on the decision-making for medications if people are interested. I can probably send it to Shona or link to it. It's on the Ontario Osteoporosis Strategy website. What about what do you need to eat to prevent fractures? Well, one thing I'm going to emphasize is that you really need to focus on meeting your energy needs for physical function and strength. And this is particularly true in runners, rather than focusing on fat or body weight. Many runners are expending a lot of calories. And if you are not carefully monitoring your intake and making sure that you eat enough to compensate for the calories you're burning, you may experience inadvertent undereating. And that means you're not eating enough calories for the kind of energy you're burning. And then that means you're losing weight. And if you're losing weight, you're losing muscle, fat, and bone. So you will always lose from all 3 compartments. So you can cause bone loss just by inadvertent undereating. And you want to avoid that. Running, it's kind of this double-edged sword, because, to run faster, the lighter you are, the faster you'll run. But that lightness comes at a cost, right? And I know that sometimes from a body image perspective, people think that being thinner is better, but from an osteoporosis and fracture risk perspective, that's not the case. So we want to try to prevent weight loss. If we are trying to lose weight because we are overweight, then what you would want to do is be very careful about, you eat a little bit less each day, but then you want to make sure that you're still getting adequate protein, adequate calcium, adequate vitamin D, and then maybe doing resistance training to maintain muscle and bone while you're losing weight. So you really want to focus on meeting your energy needs and focus on maintaining muscle and bone if you're trying to lose weight, or avoid losing weight and try to focus on meeting your energy needs for your physical function and strength. Relative energy deficiency in sport is when someone is under fueling, and then they can have a number of physiological changes that can affect their mood, it can affect their immune system, it can affect their fracture risk, among many other things. This can occur in people who have clinical eating disorders. This can be, or subclinical disordered eating, but also in people who have this inadvertent undereating that I mentioned. And people that are at highest risk for relative energy deficiency in sport, cyclists, rowers, runners, jockeys, and sports with weight classes. And so you can see among that are people who have endurance sports with high energy expenditure, because it's very easy to undereat if you are doing an endurance sport with high energy expenditure or burning a lot of energy. The other time it can be a problem is when you have a lot of fluctuations in training volume and intensity. So think about those times where you're training for a marathon. There's some times where you're not training as hard, other times where you're running lots and lots of long runs. You need to change your diet during those periods so that you're not inadvertently undereating during those periods where your training volume is high. So you may need to consult a sports dietitian, or just be very conscious of the fact that you need to eat more calories during those times. Also, people have fluctuating hormone levels, and that can actually influence bone loss and eating and digestion and many other things. You want to make sure that you're eating adequate calcium. So if you're 50 years of age and older, you need 1,200 milligrams a day. There's a calcium calculator. You can Google that. Osteoporosis Canada has one, and you can actually put in what you eat in a day, and it'll tell you if you're getting enough. It's ideal to get it from food sources whenever possible. So some of the data looking at calcium supplementation, there is a small risk of certain types of heart problems, aortic calcification, and other adverse events associated with calcium intake, and it's often related to supplements and not food. So if you can, you want to try to get all of your calcium from food, only taking a supplement when you cannot do that, when there's barriers in place. So for example, if you're a vegan and you find it really hard to hit those calcium targets, then you might consider a supplement, but I would really discuss it with your physician and or pharmacist or dietitian. You also want to make sure you're getting enough protein. So our body is constantly doing muscle protein synthesis and muscle protein breakdown all of the time. And if we're not getting enough protein, then we're going to do more muscle protein breakdown than muscle protein synthesis. And so you want to make sure you're eating adequate protein, and you want to spread your intake throughout the day so that you don't have periods where you don't have enough and then you go into muscle protein breakdown. So for example, if you eat dinner at 6 o'clock at night, have your bolus of protein, and then you sleep for many hours, and you wake up in the morning and go for a run and then don't eat again till lunch, you've gone a really long time with not supplying your body with calories and protein. So your body's going to go flip into muscle protein breakdown, which is what you don't want. So you want to think about getting enough protein throughout the day. The RDA in Canada suggests 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. So you can calculate what your body weight is in kilograms and multiply it by 0.8. That is the bare minimum you need. And some research suggests that we need more, especially if you're highly physically active and or if you're older. And so if you look at Stu Phillips' research suggests that 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram body weight each day. So that is actually quite a bit of protein. And then you want to split that up. So 30 grams in the morning, 30 grams at lunch, 30 grams at dinner, and anything that's left over, if you calculate your protein intake, probably in your snacks, right? So you want to spread it throughout the day. And try to think about, and if you eat only animal or only plant foods, then think about very carefully where you're getting your protein from. Often you have to eat more of a food to get the same amount of protein. So animal foods tend to be more efficient in that, a size of chicken or steak the size of a deck of cards is probably 20 grams of protein, whereas to get 20 grams of protein out of beans, you might need to eat like 2 cups of beans, which is quite a lot. So you need to think about how much you're actually getting from the foods that you're eating. We did a series, it's called the Protein Primer. It's 5 really short YouTube videos. If you go to the Bones Lab YouTube channel, you can find it. And it talks a lot about how to calculate how much protein you need and the different sources of protein and how to optimize your diet that way. So the final nutritional one is vitamin D. There are very few food sources of vitamin D. I know in Canada, the sun is not high enough in the sky between the months of October and March to make it through your skin. So you're not really getting much from sunlight. So you either have to save up a lot during the summertime, or you have to take a supplement. Many peak Canadians are deficient at some point during the winter because of that. If you're age 19 to 69, Health Canada recommends 600 international units a day. And if you're 70 or older, 800 international units a day. We don't want too much vitamin D. Similar with calcium supplementation, it can lead to problems. So you want to consult your physician in terms of how much you need, or consult a dietitian. And you don't want to take more than you need. The most common cause of fractures is falls, so we also want to prevent falls. When I try to think about fall prevention in the context of running, so the things you may want to think about is running on ice and wet surfaces, so avoiding that if you can, or being a bit more cautious in your running. Trip hazards, so uneven sidewalks. I tripped over a very small lip in a sidewalk and fell really hard. And if I had had really low bone mass, I probably would have broken something. So thinking about, being mindful on sidewalks, trails. I took another big spill hiking on a trail once when I was hiking really fast, and there was a bunch of leaves and I didn't see the tree root. So being mindful of those things. And if you do have low bone mass or you're worried about fractures, then you may need to try to avoid these scenarios or just be a bit more mindful in your running. Wear good shoes with good traction. Make sure your laces are tied. You may want to think about incorporating balance and agility training and working on protective responses so that you're better able to respond to falls. So you can, if you do fall, you have the agility to react quickly, because that reaction time in those protective responses does change with age. And so you can kind of lose it without really realizing that you don't have that agility anymore. The other things would be low blood sugar and changes in blood pressure. So again, making sure that your blood pressure is under control and that you're fueling yourself adequately so you don't increase your fall risk inadvertently by not eating enough. And finally, if you are taking medications that affect the brain blood sugar, or that's a lot of B's, brain, blood sugar, blood pressure, you want to think carefully about how you time your runs and make sure that you're not running when you're really dizzy or affected by those medications. There's a question about K2. Currently, our guidelines do not suggest that you need to supplement with vitamin K. Some of the research on vitamin K is not that great, so there's a high risk of bias. And so eating a well-balanced diet with a variety of foods should get you enough vitamin K, and there's not a need to supplement with extra vitamin K. So we think about optimizing bone health across the lifespan. So during, the ages, let's say before 20, we're increasing bone mass, and we sort of reach a peak bone mass, and we kind of sit there up until probably around age 35 or 40, and then we start losing bone mass at a rate of 0.5% to 1% per year. During menopause, women can lose 2 to 5% per year. Some women lose it more rapidly, some more slowly. And then it goes back to that age-related loss of 0.5% to 1% per year. So if you start with a low peak bone mass, those losses during menopause can put you into the at-risk category. Or if you have other risk factors that are causing bone loss, that can put you into that kind of at-risk category earlier. Men who have low hormone levels also lose bone. So osteoporosis also occurs in men, and they're underdiagnosed frequently. So when we think about the lifespan approach, we want to try to achieve peak bone mass. So encourage everyone who's young or preteen or teens to try to do everything they can to optimize their peak bone mass, because some people will say that osteoporosis is a pediatric disease with geriatric consequences, right? We build our base in our youth, and then you want to maintain your bone mass as best you can. So trying to reduce modifiable risk factors wherever possible, get enough calories, get enough calcium, get enough vitamin D, get lots of the types of exercise that can be positive for bone, and then minimize loss with aging by doing those things as well. And so we think about the types of exercise that tend to be what we call osteogenic or stimulating bone. These are ones that have high magnitude loads, high frequency of loading, dynamic activities where you're moving around as opposed to static, multiple bouts, short duration, and then a combination of impact exercise and resistance training. So that's kind of what we want to aim for to maintain bone mass. We think about observational studies that have looked at sport performance and bone mineral density. It's been suggested that some sports are associated with having a higher bone mineral density, and you can see that they're often the ones that involve high forces, like high speed movements, or impact. So basketball, soccer, football, volleyball, gymnastics, strength and power training, track running, not cross country, racket sports, hockey. Whereas endurance sports that don't have that same impact are not associated with higher bone mass, so swimming and cycling being examples. The other thing we need to think about is that certain sports actually are more associated with bone stress injuries. So these are ones with really high impact and repetitive loading. So cross-country running, new military recruits, gymnastics, basketball, track running, and these often occur in the lower extremities. So what do we want to do if we want to prevent falls and fractures? So what we recommend in osteoporosis guidelines is that you do balance and functional training at least twice a week. And we do that because there's high certainty evidence that balance and functional training can reduce the risk of falls and the rate of being the rate of being a faller. And then strength training at least twice a week to try to maintain and build muscle and maintain and build bone. We want to encourage people to do other activities for fun and fitness, and that includes running, in addition to, but not instead of, balance and functional and strength training. So what are balance exercises? So I like to put them into sort of 4 categories: anticipatory control, dynamic stability, functional stability limits, and reactive control. Anticipatory control and dynamic stability, a lot of activities have both of those things. So those are things like when you're able to shift your body position to accommodate for instability. So if you think about when you go to walk upstairs, you have to shift your body, you lift one leg and you shift your weight to the other leg. That's anticipatory control. Your body does it naturally, but people who have poor balance really struggle with that and lose their balance really easily when they go from standing on 2 legs to 1 leg. Dynamic stability is your ability to stay stable while you're moving around in space. So for example, polka dancing requires you to shift between legs really quickly and also spin around in circles, right? Someone who has very poor balance would really struggle with either of those tasks, never mind when they're combined, right? Functional stability limits is your ability to maintain balance even when you're reaching or your center of mass is moving very far out towards your stability limits. And then reactive control is your ability to reestablish stability after a perturbation. So if you think about if you're out running and you run into someone, they put you off balance, you're able to reestablish stability without falling. So those are examples. So some examples of balance exercises. So easier balance exercises. Oh, wait, can we just flip back for a second? Sorry, flip back to the slide before. Thanks. Easier balance exercises would be heel raises, walking on toes or heels, or toe taps on a step. More difficult ones would be doing an agility ladder, lateral hops, shrimp squats, and step-ups. In the functional stability limits, reaching or weight shifting in all directions would be an easier version, and a harder version would be like a one-legged deadlift or Romanian deadlift or a hip airplane type movement. And then reactive control, moving while standing on an unstable surface, or external push or pull on the body part while doing an activity. So I have an example here of the lateral hops, and this is a great activity that you can do to work on agility, but you might want to incorporate a variety of activities so that you hit all of these categories. So now we can play the video.
While keeping your torso facing forward, hips and shoulders level. Maintain full balance for 2 seconds before jumping on the other leg. Make sure you sink into the landing by landing softly into a quarter squat, which means that your hips shift back, knees bend forward, and body moving downward. If you have trouble balancing, it's better to hop several times and let your body find its balance than to use your other leg to assist. Start off with a short distance and gradually increase the distance as you become more advanced to challenge your balance.
So that's more advanced balance exercise. I like it also because it involves impact. So hopefully stimulating bone in addition to challenging agility. So again, whether that's appropriate for you, it depends on your health and fitness and history, but that's an advanced balance exercise. So we also want to incorporate resistance training. And I want to reiterate that resistance training does not have to be complicated, but it should be hard. So it should feel very difficult to do. And if you want a basic resistance training program, it doesn't have to be complicated. You can have 6 exercises, 1 from each of these categories: a push exercise, a pull exercise, a squat exercise, a hinge exercise, a carry, and a press exercise. So if you have 1 from each category, you've pretty much hit most of the major muscle groups. And for many people, this is a great start. And I did that workout today. So it doesn't have to be complicated, but it should feel very difficult. So let's flip to the next slide. So the way to design your resistance training program, you can start with doing that program twice a week, do 2 sets per exercise, pick a version of the exercise that you can do about 6 to 10 times and work on your form. It should feel hard. Then progress to a version of the exercise or a weight where you can do 6 to 10 reps, but it requires high effort, meaning that you can maybe do 6 reps and you have 1 or 2 left in the tank, but that's it. Like if I had to push you, you could only do 1 or 2 more, right? So it should feel really hard. You should go almost to fatigue. I suggest people do the lowering phase for 4 seconds and the lifting phase for 2 seconds. And then they progress the number of sets they do, the number of reps they do, and then the number of sets, and then eventually choose a harder version of the exercise. So if we could just quickly play this video, this is an example of a hinge exercise. And what she's doing is she's using a resistance band to make it more difficult, but she's also using a kickstand positioning, meaning most of her weight is on the front leg. And so she's using the back leg mainly for balance. So it's increasing the challenge because she's working 1 leg at a time instead of doing 2 legs. So this is a regression of a deadlift exercise. So a weighted deadlift is a harder version of this. But if you don't want to start with a deadlift, this is an easier version of a hinge exercise. So we can flip to the next slide. What about impact exercise? So many people think we need weight bearing or impact for bone, and research suggests that combining impact and strength training is better for bone. The challenge is not everybody can do impacts. If you have stress fractures, or you have arthritis or other reasons it may be harder to do, or if you have really low bone mass, you don't want to start with high impact exercise. So I usually suggest a phased approach. You want to condition your muscles. So start with the strength training piece and then working on, lower impact activities. And then if appropriate for you, progressing to moderate impact and then eventually high impact. So do this if you value the possible benefits for bone mineral density, but consider that people who have balance impairments or arthritis or have moderate to high risk osteoporosis, they may need to do other types of activities if the risks outweigh the benefits. Some guidelines suggest to do 3 to 5 sets of 10 to 20 reps of an impact exercise with 1 to 2 minute rest. A grapevine is like the old aerobics exercise where you kind of go, your legs kind of opposite each other. If you Google grapevine, you'll see it's just like aerobics use. So that's a very low intensity movement. Okay, we can flip to the next slide. So this is kind of some inspiration. This is a video. Do you have the video? So just some inspiration to see how functional, that's a deadlift, a carry, how these functional movements are associated with resistance training exercises and how resistance training can improve your fitness and function, and improve your ability to do daily things. So with aging, our strength decreases. If we want to be able to continue to do these things, we have to maintain our strength. And so we can align our resistance training exercises with the types of activities that we do every day. So push, pull, squat, hinge, press, you pretty much cover most of them. We can flip to the next slide. So I wanted to end with this as a question that I got, and I did a Twitter thread on how to answer this question, and it kind of encompasses a summary of what we talked about today. So someone asked me, I have a client with osteopenia or low bone mass. Can she run on dirt, but not too many miles? So there was a worry that the impact exercise with running may be risky. And so I'm going to talk about how I answered that question. So if we go to the next slide, I started with, it's really hard to give a yes or no answer as to whether or not any activity is safe. People with low bone mineral density are at increased risk of fracture. And the things that increase their risk are decreased BMD, but also changes in protective responses, such as being able to put their hand out to prevent a fall, as well as other risk factors that change their fall risk. So a hard landing surface or ground reaction force is going to be making more likely to fracture. Having less soft tissue on your body, so being very thin, is going to increase your risk in a sense because you've got less padding. Increased external loads if you're carrying something while you fall, or if you're carrying something and that's going to load your spine. As well as microcrack accumulation. So we think about stress fractures as essentially accumulation of microdamage. So if you have that accumulation of microdamage, you're more likely to experience a stress fracture or other type of fracture. And then finally, also your ability for your muscles or your discs to take up that load energy. So if you think about anytime you've gone down a set of stairs and there's one more stair than you think there is, and you land and it's a really hard landing. And that's because your legs are straight rather than bent. When you land on a bent leg, your reflexes trigger your muscles to take up that load energy. So your muscles are taking up most of the impact. When you land on a straight leg, your muscles aren't doing that. So it feels a lot harsher on your joints. So anything that reduces the muscle reactions, or if you have less water in your discs or a disc degenerate with age, that reduces their ability to take up that impact. And so that affects your bones, your spine, or the other bones that the impact is on, right? Like your leg bones or whatever you're landing on, right? So muscle fatigue can also influence, if you have more muscle fatigue, your muscles aren't supporting your spine well. That's another example, right? So, go back. So what we need to do is think about what are the risk factors, what is your probability of, and talk about how to decrease that risk as best we can. So a person has to always weigh their desire to do the potentially risky activity with their willingness to accept that risk, right? So if a person really wants to run, what are the things we can do to reduce the risk? So flip to the next slide now. So things that might reduce the risk during running are softer surfaces, running on softer surfaces, ensuring you don't have a lot of muscle fatigue, so have proper conditioning, increase the pace and duration of mileage gradually, not overtraining, shoes that absorb impact, and running softer with shorter strides. You can also run on level surfaces without trip hazards or being mindful of trip hazards, and then do other things to reduce the risk. So doing the balance and agility training, doing the moderate and, or high intensity strength training, making sure you're getting adequate calcium, vitamin D, calories for your energy burned, avoid weight loss and bone loss, and if you're at risk of fractures, considering medication. So that's ultimately what we want to think about in terms of preventing fractures with running. So we'll go to the next slide. So that's a summary. Talk to your doctor about your risk factors for falls and fractures. Consider medication if you're at risk. Get adequate calcium, protein, vitamin D, and calories, and do balanced functional and strength training at least twice a week. So we'll flip to the next slide, which I think is the last one. I have my socials listed there if you want to follow us. We tend to post educational content. I'd just like to thank my team for all the research that they do with us, and I'm happy to answer any questions that folks have. I see there's a bunch in the chat, so I'll maybe let Shona facilitate.
Excuse me. Excellent. Thank you so much, Lora. Yeah, and highly recommend following Lora on the socials. I've learned so much from you. So thank you for that. And again, yeah, thank you for the presentation. Yeah, so question time. Yeah, just if there are friends of yours who maybe are struggling with this concept. I mean, like I say, I'm 40 years old, but I have friends who already are struggling with fractures and so on. And like Lora says, they are, they're worrisome. We do these things are leading us into our elderly life, and we need to make sure that we stay healthy and strong. So, Lora, if you don't mind, yes, let's dive into a couple of these questions. There were some really, really, really good ones. I'm going to ask this from Sabina. Sabina's on our team as well. So Sabina's asking, she says, thank you so much for the presentation. I have osteopenia. Can I reverse this or merely slow it down? And you gave a bit of an introduction as to, building up as we going through our 20s and 30s. But can you reverse this essentially?
So reverse is a strong word. I think that we all have to accept that we are going to lose bone with aging. Right? So that's a trajectory. You're going to lose muscle with aging. You're going to lose your VO2 max is going to go down with aging. All of these things happen because there are changes that occur with aging to our cells, to lots of different things. What you can influence is that trajectory. So how steep it is, right? So I don't think reverse is a realistic goal. And I'll say that because there is some research to suggest that you can have small increases in bone mass with impact and resistance training, but they are quite small. So if you're starting with really low bone mass, it may not be realistic to try to get back to where you were, right? But is it realistic to have a small increase or to maintain what you have and not have that trajectory go down? Potentially. And I think it's going to vary from person to person, because it's going to, everyone responds to exercise differently. Some people have risk factors that are not modifiable, right? So if you have type 1 diabetes, you may not be able to address the risk associated with that diabetes with exercise. You may not be able to reverse all of the risk attributable to your diabetes with exercise. So it really depends on you and your congregation of risk factors, but you might be able to influence the trajectory and make it less steep. I hope that answers your question. I saw a question about HRT. Hormone replacement therapy does prevent bone loss. And the kind of guidance is tricky. So it's not used to treat low bone mass anymore. It's not a primary treatment for fracture risk. It's often used if people have menopausal symptoms. So if people have menopausal symptoms, it's a good way to treat that. It's not used as a primary treatment for bone loss specifically, but that's a conversation with a physician, because some physicians may think it's a good option for you if you happen to have menopausal symptoms, but you also have bone issues, then it treats both of them. So for some people, low dose hormone therapy may actually be a good idea, but it's something you need to talk to your physician about as a potential therapy.
Excellent. This question from Pam just ties in with that. She's saying, I started running because of low bone density. It now only decreases slowly. I'm 77 and I run 3 times a week. I mean, is that enough? Running, of course, you mentioned earlier, there's swimming and cycling that are, non-weight bearing. Is running enough in terms of looking after your bone?
It's a great question. So running is a really fine two-edged. You have impact associated with running, but also runners tend to have really low bone mass and they burn a lot of calories. So I think that running in moderation, it's hard because there's not a lot of studies that randomize people to running and no running and look at whether they're going to fracture in the long term, right? So there are really a handful of studies in people with low bone mass that have looked at impact exercise alone. And I'm talking like less than a handful, like 2, I think, like a few, not very many. And so it's really hard to answer that question, but I would say that if you like running, then keep running. But I would also suggest that you incorporate resistance exercise and balance exercise so that you have those muscle pull on bones. So it's a different type of loading that'll keep your muscles and bones strong. And then if it's appropriate for you, you might consider some higher impact activities, because running is not that high impact, right? So you might consider if your body's conditioned for it and it's appropriate for you, to consider some higher impact activities, maybe starting with the lateral jumps, which also then double bang for buck. You get the impact, you get the balance training, right? So incorporating some higher impact activities to stimulate increases in bone in addition to the running, because running is a more moderate impact activity if it's appropriate for you. And then the balance and agility training to prevent you from falling. So keep running if you want to run, but add the other stuff. That's what I would say.
Laura, I'm so glad you're saying this, because a lot of the people on the call now are our members, and they hear me say this all the time, that running's great, but it's really it's we need to be doing all the balance, all the jumps. I mean, Darcy, I'll just pop this up now. Darcy was asking the same. She's one of our members, and she's saying, will I get that kind of strength training? And we call that our Foster Beyond 50 classes. And yeah, I mean, we do incorporate prehabilitation for running, lifting for getting all the lean muscle mass, and a lot of the jumps in our 3rd class. But I'm just really glad that it's coming out of someone else's mouth for now, which because otherwise I just sound like a broken record all the time. So thank you for saying that.
The other thing is, like, some of the studies that have done resistance and impact exercise in people with low bone mass, they're doing high intensity impact and resistance exercise. This is not just like, low intensity stuff. Like, they're lifting, or working really hard. And so I think that's an important thing to understand, is that it's not just the 2-pound weights in your basement that are going to maintain or increase your bone mass. You have to be working pretty hard. You have to be working at a pretty high intensity to see the same benefits that they're seeing in some of these studies.
Yep, 100%. I want to go to one of the questions. It was from Joe. It's a little bit specific to her, but it's an interesting question, because I think, you know, you asked the question earlier around like what are the symptoms of getting osteoporosis. But also, you know, very often I think menopause gets, and I know we're diving into a little bit more around the menopause specific here, but it gets blamed for a lot of this, right?
Yeah.
So Joe, as an example, is saying here, I'm 49, I'm well into perimenopause. I've been training with Coach Perry with us for a while, so she's been doing strength consistently. Just been told I have a stress fracture of my femoral neck. No fall. Can menopause have caused this? She also mentioned she's also a strength, you know, instructor, so she's been doing strength training. You know, those other
I would
factors.
say yes and no.
Yes, yeah.
So basically, stress fractures happen when you have microdamage accumulation without adequate, that outpaces your ability to repair it, right? So you have essentially this microdamage that, so our bones, when we stress our bones, let's say you do start a new impact program, you're going to accumulate some microdamage, and their bone cells are going to come along and repair that. But the bone cell repair process is slow. So if you are then accumulating more and more and more microdamage with that, and you're more doing it faster than your bone's ability to repair it, that's when stress fractures happen. If you have a low bone mass, then you know your ability to you have less bone, therefore you're more likely to develop a fracture more quickly. Does that make sense? So, so people who have lower bone mass have a lower threshold in terms of like their bones are less strong, so they're gonna have a stress fracture develop more quickly than someone who doesn't. So it's not just the menopause and just the low bone mass. I think it's also the so you're, yes, the menopause can have caused it in the sense that if you have low bone mass, but also it's the microdamage accumulation. So whatever your it is, the activities that you're doing potentially are creating microdamage at a faster rate than you can repair them. So you need to address both the risk factors for bone loss and the loading on your bones. So you're loading them too much for your ability to repair them.
Yep, that's 100% right, and that's, yeah, perhaps where good coaching comes into play. But then Beth is asking a good question here, which mentions in and around these risk factors, Laura, and she's saying, how much does genetics or being hereditary then play a part? Like, so what do you do then in that situation if, you know, if your mom has had osteoporosis or osteopenia? I mean, surely that, you know, does that play? That's a big
yes, it absolutely does. Yep. So there's some non-modifiable risk factors, right? So if you have type 1 diabetes, you can't change that. If you have a history of osteoporosis in your family that predisposes you, you can't change that. What you can try to do is address the modifiable risk factors. So you don't want to compound your risk by layering on modifiable risk factors. So if you are a person who's at high risk of developing osteoporosis in the future, you don't want to be one of those people who's doing inadvertent undereating, especially so. You don't want to do one of those people who's overtraining and developing lots of microdamage. You don't want to be one of those people who's not eating enough calcium and vitamin D and not doing the things you can to prevent bone loss from occurring. And I'll say, like, many people also, you know, body image become, you know, as we're changing, and this is especially true with aging, you know, as a woman, you know, I think about, you know, I look at my face and I'm getting wrinkles and my body doesn't sit the way it was, and it's harder for me to maintain, you know, weight and that sort of thing. And you worry about these changes with aging, and we try to then think about weight loss and all that stuff. And that can be really damaging, because then you're trying to stay slim, but at the expense of muscle and bone, because you're losing muscle and bone already. And then if you layer on weight loss, whether it's due to inadvertent undereating because you're running too hard, or whether it's because you're trying to lose weight to achieve some sort of body image that you want, that can also cause bone loss. So we just have to be very conscious of these decisions and their impact on our muscle and bone. You're on mute.
Thank you. You'd swear that we had learned how to unmute ourselves since COVID, but apologies. Yeah. So, yeah, I just find is that the females that I work with, there's so much underfueling. And so much so, and guys, we as I mentioned in the chat, we're doing another webinar. It's in the beginning of June, so in 2 weeks' time, with Dr. Kate Ackerman, who is, yeah, I mean, again, like I had a little fan moment with Laura. I have the same with Dr. Kate Ackerman, absolute experts in her field around this exact topic, around fueling for your training. And I just found, Laura, in my experience working with menopausal females, is very often they're under fueling, but their symptoms are, fatigue, and I'm tired, and it's all of these things. But those are the same symptoms as low energy availability or red S, and so guys, definitely make sure that you tune into that. If you hit subscribe on this channel here, we'll make sure that you see that. But definitely, I think that's, control your controllables, I think is the important thing there. If you have a genetic disposition to this, control what you can control as a runner. So let me go back into these questions. There were a few really good questions. I sort of pop back around the nutrition side of things. Sorry. There was one that I really wanted to ask. Oh yeah. Darcy was asking, if you're talking about calcium in particular, Laura, how do you supplement calcium? So you said you want to get those sources from natural food sources generally, and if you're lactose intolerant, does that challenge that a little bit?
I mean, it just means you have to look for non-dairy or lactose-free milk sources, right? If you like dairy and you're just lactose intolerant, you could look for lactose-free milk, lactose-free yogurt, and those sources. There are also non-dairy and vegan sources of calcium. So if you go to the calcium calculator, you can actually pick things, like you can say, okay, I ate an apricot or whatever, or like a dried apricots, and it'll tell you how much you got. So you can actually use that to figure out foods that are high in calcium that are not dairy foods. So there are foods, you just have to be more conscious of including those types of food in your diet if you're not eating dairy foods. Also, many plant-based milks are supplemented with calcium and vitamin D. So if you read the label, you can see how much calcium and vitamin D those have. So if you're eating or drinking almond milk, for example, you can see how much calcium. I think tofu would be another one. Like molasses has a lot of calcium, really weirdly enough. So it's thinking about just finding those foods that don't have that don't have lactose in them, but that are also high in calcium. And you can use the calcium calculator to do that. Or you can have lactose-free milk and yogurt as well. Interestingly, yogurt is not fortified with vitamin D. So you have to read the label. Milk is fortified, but yogurt is not.
Okay. Oh wow. That's
unless it says on the label that it is. Some of them are, but it's not like all. Well, and it also depends on your country. So all milk in Canada is fortified. I don't know about other countries. I can't speak to that with good confidence. But it's knowing, like if you're having yogurt or other foods, is looking at the label and whether or not it's supplemented or fortified, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, and that's where I was going to go next, is just around vitamin D. I mean, so we, living in South Africa, it's interesting because we say, it's not a problem because we get so much of the sun, and yes, we do. But for the most part, people who lather on like the sunscreen, may struggle with that. But Susan had a question around vitamin D, and she said, what about taking 2,000 IU of vitamin D3 daily? Is that okay? Maybe just expand a little bit on vitamin D, because I think we have a lot of people from the northern hemisphere here. Yeah. Is that something you should be tested on?
Yeah, okay, so in general, from a population level, most people, who are under the age of 70 need 600 international units, and people 70 and over need 800 international units. And it's not recommended that you take more, because there are studies that show that there's actually, if you're taking too much for your body, that you can actually increase the risk of aortic calcification and kidney problems and a bunch of other things. That said, there are some people who do need more because they're that for whatever reason they may have certain genetic differences that cause them to need more. And unfortunately, it's really hard to know that. So I have a fun story I'll tell, and that is, for a variety of reasons, I had to have some tests done for research because we were testing out a scanner. And so they scanned me, and a colleague physician of mine said, oh, the protocol is fine, but it looks like you have a stress fracture. So I want to do a workup to make sure that you're fine. So she did that, sent me for another set of x-rays and blood tests and stuff like that. And actually, I didn't have a stress fracture. It was just my glute insertion was very, very bright on the scan, and it looked like a stress fracture, but it was not. But she ended up in the blood work that revealed that I had secondary hyperparathyroidism, which is basically high levels of parathyroid hormone, which I wouldn't have symptoms because it wasn't really high, and could potentially be a modifiable cause of bone loss. And so I ended up having to go on higher doses of vitamin D to get that under control. And so I am a person who needs more vitamin D, but this was discovered completely by accident. Right. But the problem is, I know in Canada, you can't just ask for a vitamin D test. Most physicians won't do it unless you have risk factors. So this is, again, where if you do have risk factors, if you have a family history, you might be able to push your physician to do the test. In Canada, you can pay for it. It costs, I think, $60 to have a vitamin D test. So it's up to you if you want to do that. But I wouldn't take 2,000 international units a day unless there's a good reason for you to do so. So if your doctor has told you to do so because you need more vitamin D for some reason. There's also a list of risk factors. So in the Osteoporosis Canada guidelines, they actually have a table that says, here are examples of conditions where people might need more vitamin D than the recommended. So you could look that up. I can't remember all the things off the top of my head. Secondary hyperparathyroidism would be one of them. But some people do need more, but I wouldn't advise everyone just take extra just in case. That's not a good idea. Sorry, that was a really long answer, but hopefully that was helpful.
No. I think that's perfect. Exactly that. So, sorry, there's just someone asking just for your socials again. So I just want to pop that up. There we go, guys. So if you want to check that out, highly recommend it. And then Laura, if you don't mind, I'm going to touch. You mentioned thyroid and your story there. Someone here is asking a similar sort of story. Rehormones. Like, so is there anything else you want to add with regards to thyroid? Does that affect the chances?
So basically having hyperthyroidism can cause bone loss. So if you have hyperthyroidism and it goes untreated, that can cause bone loss. And there was research many years ago to suggest taking thyroid medication caused bone loss. But the problem is it's not the medication that's the problem. It's that your thyroid hormone is not titrated properly. So basically what happens is if you're hypothyroid, then they put you on a thyroid medication to try to make you normal. And they want to, you need to, if they put you on too much, then you become hyperthyroid with the medication, and then that causes bone loss. So as long as your hypothyroidism is corrected and titrated to the normal range, it's fine. So you just have to keep on top of it and keep coming back for the follow-ups and the blood tests to make sure that when you go on the thyroid medication, that they get it in the normal range and it's not too high for you. And then it doesn't cause an increased risk of fractures. So the medication itself only is risky if they give you too much, essentially. And so that's why they get you to come back and see where your levels are to make sure that you're in the right place.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with elite athletes who have won like ultra marathons who have hypothyroidism, and it can be very, very well controlled. So yeah. So brilliant. Laura, sorry, I'm not sure how much time you have. Do you mind if I carry on asking? Yep, you good? Okay, yep. Brilliant. Liz was asking, perhaps Liz missed a little bit of the initial part, but maybe it's worth repeating. Liz was just saying, not sure if this answered, what tests can be done to check bone mass, DEXA scan, and maybe just elaborate on age and whether, at what points in time to do that. I know that was answered, but maybe a brief answer there.
So there's a couple things. So there's, if you have a spine fracture, or if it's suspected that you have a spine fracture, then they would do an x-ray of your spine. So that's different than a DEXA scan. That's to see if you have a spine fracture. And then the DEXA scan, or bone mineral density test, is another type of x-ray, and they usually scan your lumbar spine and your proximal femur, or the top part of your femur. And that's because those are very common sites of fractures, so they have specific scans for those sites. People who can't have those sites scanned can actually have their wrist scanned, so it's less common, but that they do the wrist scan in people who can't have those sites scanned for some reason. And so they look at your bone mineral density in your lumbar spine and your proximal femur. When they calculate probability of fracture, they use your risk factors plus your bone mineral density of your hip. They don't use your spine scan. So a physician can look separately at your spine scan, because some people have low spine BMD and not hip BMD. So that's why it's good to look at both of them. There are other types of tests So they can also do like high resolution peripheral quantitative computed tomography and a bunch of other things. These are mostly done in research. They're not done clinically most of the time, but if you happen to be doing your testing in a place they do a lot of research, they may ask you to do it as part of a study or something like that. Also, the bone mineral density test, there's a new thing called trabecular bone score. So when they do your lumbar spine bone density, they can also now calculate this thing called trabecular bone score. And essentially, it's a way of indirectly looking at your trabecular structure. So not just bone density, but the actual structure. And there's research to suggest that that score can actually help improve their ability to understand your fracture risk. And so now the new FRAX score system actually incorporates trabecular bone score when that score is available. So they'll also put that in addition to your bone density to help improve prediction. So that's something you might see on a report or your doctor might talk about. To be honest with you, most physicians don't understand it and don't interpret it, but it is something that can be used in a FRAX score as well. Some physicians will also order blood tests, and they can measure bone biochemical markers like P1NP and CTX. CTX is a measure of bone resorption, so how much bone osteoclast activity, or the cells that break down bone. It'll measure like how much of that activity is happening. P1NP is a measure of bone formation, or how your osteoblasts, how hard they're working. And so sometimes they will order those blood tests to look at effects of treatment. They're not really good for diagnosing low bone mass. They're often used, a specialist might use it in someone who's having stress fractures. They will also measure vitamin D, parathyroid hormone, calcium levels, and a bunch of other things. So your doctor might talk to you about those tests if you're seeing a specialist and they're measuring them for a variety of reasons, but they're not done routinely in the diagnosis of osteoporosis. So they're done often in a kind of specialist scenario.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, brilliant. I have another question on that, but again, guys, I know people are dropping off. I know it's 9 p.m. in South Africa, but it's midday or work hours in the Northern Hemisphere. But we're going to carry on. There are a couple more questions. But guys, if you have enjoyed this, please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, share it with your friends. I'm really glad we're talking about this. So that makes me happy that we're finally sharing all this information to empower women. But to continue in and around, Lora, around testing and what people should be asking for. Jill was asking, I'm awaiting results from a scan. What questions can I ask? Read the results. You did mention around like a T-score. Like what are some of the important parameters that they must look for?
So with a bone mineral density test, you can ask about your FRAX probability of fracture. So that's where they take your bone density and they put it in the FRAX calculator. So you can actually Google the FRAX calculator and you can put in all your risk factors without your bone density and calculate a probability of fracture. You're not supposed to do that. That's your physician's supposed to interpret that, but you can do it. But the bone density improves its prediction. So then they add the bone density score to that, and they'll say, what is your probability of a fracture in the next 20 years, and what's your probability of hip fracture specifically in the next 20 years, or 10 years, sorry, not 20 years. And so that's one thing. So you can ask about your FRAX probability of fracture. You can also ask for the T-score. So there'll be a lumbar spine T-score and a hip or proximal femoral neck is what they use. So that's like the neck of, if you put up the picture of the DEXA scan, I can point to it, but it's the, basically you have the ball and then you have the stick, and it's like the place where the ball and stick connect. It's the neck of the femur.
Yes.
So like if the ball is the head, it's the neck part that's attaching it to the stick, or the shaft of the femur. So they actually look specifically at the bone mineral density of the neck. And that's because it's a very high percentage of trabecular bone, and that's often where people fracture. So that's why they look there. So they calculate your bone mineral density specifically in your femoral neck. And so they give you a T-score. So the T-score, can you put up that slide? Actually, I can't see it, but the slide that has the bone mineral density X-ray on it.
Yeah, it was earlier on in your slideshow.
Yes, this is like maybe like 5 or 6.
Oh, is it? Okay, I will definitely put that up. Give me a second. Sorry. Let's do that. Sorry. Bear with us, guys. We will just scroll through.
Next one.
Tell me when to stop.
No, next one. That one. Okay.
There we go.
No, back one. Back one. There we go.
That one, yeah.
So there's the neck of the femur. You can see that long rectangle that's on the neck of the femur. And if you look at the bottom, I've got like a normal distribution. So it's a little graph on the bottom that looks like a hill. And so if you think about that hill as if we took everybody's bone mineral density when they were, say, 25 years old, you know, the average, most people would be fall in the average, which is the top of the middle of that hill, right? And then the people of really high bone density are kind of on the tail end of one hill, and the people with really low bone density are on the tail end of the other hill, right? And so 0 is the middle. So if you look at the bottom of the graph, 0 is the average. And then 1 is 1 standard deviation either below or above average, and then 2 standard deviations below. So you can see the arrow on the right-hand side is pointing to like 2 standard deviations below normal, right? So basically when they give you your T-score is kind of how many standard deviations below the average of a young, healthy female you are, right? So if you're minus 1.5, that means you're 1.5 standard deviations below normal. So it's like so if you look at that chart, it would be like between the -1 and the -2, right? So that's how far from the average you are. So that's kind of what they give you. So that's the way that's the score that's probably easiest to understand. The raw bone density score you won't be able to interpret because it's bone density of 0.86 will mean nothing. But that's kind of like your comparison to average is how far from the average. So if you're +2, that means you're 2 standard deviations higher than average. If that makes sense.
Yep, that's well, yeah, sorry, makes sense to me. So I hope that makes sense to everyone else. I'm trying to keep up with the questions because there's so many, Laura. So I really, I mean, I love this. So sorry, this is my passion. It makes me so happy that people are talking about this, and yeah, that we're doing the best we can for females and males. And again, that's actually one that's come up here. Chandra mentions here, she says, you know, what an awesome topic for discussion. I think men also have osteopenia and likely doesn't get talked about as much. And obviously we're focusing on peri and post-menopause here, but I mean, are those numbers similar or slightly different?
Yeah, so I would say that like 1 in 3 women and 1 in 5 men over the age of 50 will have a fracture due to osteoporosis in their lifetime. Men often are having fractures a bit later because they don't have that their trajectory is like slower. They don't have that dip due to menopause, right? So women are often diagnosed earlier, and it's more common in women, although slightly more common in women. So it's considered a woman's disease when it's really not. And there's and in fact, when the CAMO, so the Canadian Multicenter Osteoporosis Study, looked at spine fractures in the Canadian, they were the population-based study, so they looked at like 10,000 Canadians, and they found that roughly 20% of men and roughly 20% of women had an example of a spine fracture. So the spine fracture prevalence was actually quite similar in men and women, even though they're often undiagnosed, so people don't know that they have them. Someone was asking for the link to the Bones Lab YouTube channel, so I just put it in the chat there.
100%. Yeah. Happy with that. Hopefully everyone gets that. Yeah. Yeah, we can also, we'll obviously share this with you guys as well, and please pop it on your socials as well, and we'll share, because obviously everyone registered for this. We'll obviously share the links and everything that you have with them as well. So for all of your socials for sure. There was one more question I really wanted to ask, and I just need to find it now. It was just around. Sorry, Laura. It was around, so, here we are. You might have hereditary factors. There are general factors. There's menopause. As a closing, because I mean, I'm looking at the time, and I know you've been very gracious with your time. But as a closing, like what are the things that you can do that aren't necessarily medication, or if you were advising people as to what you can do, what would be the things that you would say you can do to look after your bone health moving forward? Runner, non-runner, like what would be your go-to? What would you say?
I think everybody should first, make sure that they're eating a variety of foods that include foods that are high in calcium. Maybe consider a vitamin D supplement if you're in a country of high latitude, but please talk to your doctor before you start any supplements. Making sure you're getting adequate calories and protein for the calories that you're burning. if you are trying to lose weight, then make sure that you're getting that your calories, you're gonna have less calories because you're trying to lose weight, but you still need to get the amount of protein you need. So you might need a higher percentage of calories from protein to be able to not lose muscle and bone. Then everyone should resistance train, everyone, and working at a moderate to high intensity, regardless if you have low bone mass or not. Everyone should, because we lose muscle and we lose strength with age, and you can actually modify that trajectory if you do resistance training. Aerobic training will not do that. So you want to try to do resistance training. And then I would also encourage people to start working on their balance. You'd be surprised how balance declines until you all of a sudden can't do things anymore. So doing balance exercises is really important. So I think everyone should do those things. And then as a runner, be very mindful of inadvertent under eating and overtraining, and getting enough sleep, because muscle fatigue can affect your ability to react, and also the effects of training on your system. So getting enough sleep, and then making sure that you're not overtraining, or giving your body adequate time to recover so you don't have stress fractures, and really avoiding that inadvertent under eating. It's really important for runners, because if you think about it, like if you are really lightweight, that optimizes for running, but it's not good for bone health. So you need to find that balance of, you want to run well, you want to be strong, but you also don't want, as a middle-aged and older person, you don't want the bone loss that, I guess it depends. You can compromise. You say, well, I'll take the bone loss now and be able to run faster, but that might not be the best strategy for long term.
As a coach and scientist, I'd say no. Let's not even venture into that. Yeah, no,
that's not a good idea. It's not a good strategy, and it happens a lot, especially in young people. You see a lot of really young athletes that compromise their eating, and then they end up with osteoporosis and stress fractures in their 20s.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, and I was about to call it off, but last question, and we speak about balance, and we speak around proprioception and so on, and one of the things we do a lot at Coach Peri is and my clients will attest to this, and they think I'm a bit weird, but we do a lot of foot exercises, right?
Yep.
So a lot of foot core, like just working on the intrinsics of the foot, making sure that maybe you can also back me up on that my clients don't think I'm absolutely crazy in terms of balance and falling and
I don't think you're crazy.
Thank you.
I can't point to randomized trials that say doing these exercises are going to prevent you from falling, but we do see that with aging, people lose mobility in their joints, right? So you're less able to use, and ankle mobility is a real big one, right? And a lot of those muscles in your calf are responsible for ankle mobility. And so your ability to maintain balance, often is the muscles in your feet help you with that. But also even think about trip hazards, right? Like if I want to be able to lift my toes during running, or get clear obstacles, I need to be able to lift my toes. I need to be able to dorsiflex. If I have really poor ankle mobility, it's harder for me to do that. I need to generate higher forces to do that. And then my muscles are weak, so I can't. And so then you end up tripping more often because you can't dorsiflex, right? So I think that's something you see, that people tend to shuffle more when they get older. They don't have that ability to dorsiflex. So working on that ankle mobility, that foot mobility, is maintaining that is important if you want to be able to clear obstacles and use your feet and maintain your balance.
Yep, exactly. Guys, thank you. Because thank you, Laura, because my clients become a little bit crazy every time I make them do little toe lifts, like bicep curls for their toes and ankle mobility stuff. But I think we've just seen a lot of really good evidence in terms of runners in particular, that as they're aging, working on those intrinsics, and again the neuromuscular sort of junctions and how that works. So
and I think the ankle mobility is a big one, like doing the calf raises, the eccentric calf raises, because that also helps with tendinopathy in your ankles. A lot of people develop Achilles tendinopathies and stuff like that, and that can help with that. So working those foot muscles, like the ankle mobility exercises, can really help to prevent those from occurring. In fact, there was a study done in ballet dancers where they actually did, calf raise training, and they reduced the risk of injuries and during their ballet training season or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we're moving out of bone necessarily, but yes, those foot cores are amazing, and thank you just for backing me there. But yeah, it's been amazing, and you know, I'm just looking at all the comments coming through, and people are saying, you know, thank you so much. They really enjoyed it, guys. If you enjoyed it, share it with your friends. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube. There's a subscribe button. Highly recommend that you also go to the Bone ES Lab YouTube, and we'll share it there with them as well. And please follow. Like I say, I've learned so much. Laura, thank you. I've learned so much from you just from following you on social media. I mean, we've met for the first time, but really, really appreciate your time today. So thank you so much for that. Yeah, parting shots. Anything you want to add as we call this off? Anything at all?
Yeah, no, I just want to thank you for having me. It's been fun. I don't often talk about running, so it was really neat to think about bone health in the context of running. So this was a fun exercise for me as well. So thanks very much.
Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time. Enjoy your spring and summer as we go through. But yeah, and guys, thank you for joining. We you know, it's been so great. Awesome questions. Lots of Coach Peri members, lots of non-Coach Peri members. Like and subscribe, share with your friends, and yeah, let's my parting shots is let's change the narrative. Let's ensure that females get all the information that they can get to be the best that they can be. You're no longer, you know, I just hate this narrative around, okay, well, you're going through menopause, that's it, you're done. Let's really just empower women with all the information that they can to be the best that they can be. So again, thank you so much. And if you want to hear more, hit like and subscribe. But Laura, yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Bye.